Hello everyone, future applicants, welcome to the Financial Information File tutorial of the 2025 Innovation Fund Auction Call on Industrial Process Heat Decarbonization. This tutorial has been prepared by the Financial Engineering team at CINEA, the European Climate, Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency. Today, we will guide you through how to complete the Financial Information File, or FIF, which must be used when applying to the 2025 Heat Auction Call. First, we will explain what the Financial Information File is and what its objectives are, before walking through an illustrative worked example. Next, we will present the two most common types of business models of industrial heat projects observed in past Innovation Fund calls, and show, using examples, how their related projections should be inserted into the FIF. Finally, we will provide guidance on when to submit questions to the help desk and which aspects questions can be raised, as well as where to find additional information. The Financial Information File is a mandatory part of your application and can be downloaded from the European Commission's Funding and Tenders portal. For this call, it is compulsory to use this specific version of the FIF. Templates from previous or other Innovation Fund calls cannot be used. Before walking through the Excel template, a brief word on the purpose of the Financial Information File. The FIF collects applicants' financial data in a standardized format to enable a consistent assessment of the credibility and soundness of each project's cash flow projections. The Financial Information File may not capture all intermediary assumptions or calculation used by applicants. In practice, applicants often rely on supplementary worksheets or their own detailed financial models. These additional worksheets may be combined with the FIF template, but a fully completed FIF is still required. Proposals missing a completed FIF will be rejected. We will now walk you through a fictive, illustrative worked example in the Financial Information File for a project industrial process heat to a third party. The first tab is the disclaimer, which should be read carefully. As stated here, the assumptions and financial projections included in this document may be based on more detailed underlying assumptions and calculations. Next is the Instructions tab. This tab provides guidance on how to complete the template. Key points to note. The template contains sheets in three main colors: gray, blue, and red. Gray sheets include the disclaimer, instructions, model check, Part C support sheet, and the history of changes. The blue sheet, called FIF Inputs, is the one you need to complete. This is the core of the template and should be your main focus. Red sheets display calculation results automatically and must not be altered. When entering data, use the correct sign convention. Revenues should be positive, while OPEX and CAPEX should be negative. Projections must cover the entire operational lifetime of your project. This will be explained in more detail later. Finally, do not to modify any formulas anywhere in the spreadsheets. Let's now begin with the only blue sheet that needs to be completed, the FIF Inputs sheet. At the top of the sheet, enter the project name and select its country of implementation. The model start date corresponds to the first projected day in the template and is fixed at the 1st of January, 2026. This cannot be modified. Projections for revenues, costs and cash flows are expressed in thousands of euros. This unit is fixed and cannot be changed. In this first section, you are asked to provide the project timelines and assumptions for the weighted average cost of capital, or WACC. The project starting date is by default the first day of the month following the grant agreement signature, planned in November 2026. It is therefore set by default to the 1st of December, 2026. Enter the financial close and entry into operation dates, which are key milestones of your proposal. Error checks will appear in red if these dates do not meet the call requirements, specifically within 2 years for financial close and 4 years for entry into operation after the grant agreement signature. Next, specify the operational lifetime of your project. This is the entire period during which your project will function and operate. Note that the operational lifetime is not the same as the project duration, which refers to the period during which the project benefits from Innovation Fund support. Your projections must cover the full operational life, not just the Innovation Fund grant disbursement period, which for this call is 5 years after the entry into operation date. To complete the project WACC calculation, enter the cost of debt, if applicable, and the share of equity relative to the project's total equity and debt financing. The total equity and debt used in the WACC calculation corresponds to the amount required from investors to develop and build the project. The ratio here reflects the expected proportion of equity secured at financial close to finance project capex. Do not include any Innovation Fund grant amount or subsidies in the equity portion. Ensure that the equity and debt portions used in the WACC formula are consistent with those used in the project's cash flow projections. In this illustrative example, equity represents 100% of the financing for project development and construction. As you can see, certain parameters are automatically derived and cannot be altered: beta, risk-free rate, equity risk premium, and innovation risk premium are calculated using standardized default parameters to ensure consistency across projects. The risk-free rate is based on the selected country of implementation and corresponds to the monthly average over the last 10 years of the 10-year government bond rate, using data from the European Central Bank. The second section is dedicated to auction parameters and represents a core part of the template. Here, you provide the information needed to calculate the bid price and the maximum grant requested. Please note that failure to complete all entries or errors in the data may result in the project being deemed ineligible for funding. First, a drop-down menu allows you to select between the two medium temperature topics and the high temperature topic. Below that, indicate the temperature level of the process heat, following instructions in the call text. Next, enter the subsidy requested per unit of produced heat, expressed in euros per thermal megawatt hour. The following steps will convert this subsidy per unit of heat into the project's bid price, expressed in euros per ton of CO2 abated. Two drop-down menus allow you to determine the amount of greenhouse gas abatement per megawatt hour of heat produced. If the project does not replace and decommission existing fossil fuel capacity, select No in the first drop-down menu. The template will then use the default ETS heat benchmark to calculate greenhouse gas abatement. If the project will replace and decommission existing fossil fuel capacity, select one of the 4 available choices in the second drop-down menu, in this example, natural gas. The template will use the corresponding fossil fuel standard emission factor and assume a conversion efficiency of 90% to derive the greenhouse gas abatement per megawatt hour of heat produced. The bid price calculated by the template is expressed with 2 digits after the comma. Any additional digits will be truncated. The next step requires applicants to state the nominal thermal capacity of the heat production unit, expressed in thermal megawatt hours. A drop-down menu allows applicants to select the main thermal technology. Below that, indicate the main type of equipment. In this illustrative example, no selection or information was provided, which triggers error signals. Next, indicate the expected average yearly volume of electrified or direct renewable heat produced, expressed in thermal megawatt hours. This value is essential because, together with the bid price, it determines the maximum Innovation Fund grant for the project. The template performs a consistency check to ensure that the annual heat volume entered aligns with the heat volumes projected during the grant disbursement period in the cash flow projections. This section will be covered in more detail later. As described in the call text, the auction design aims to disincentivize electrified heat solutions that increase emissions from electricity generation and system costs. By default, subsidized heat production is limited to 70% of the total maximum hours in a year at the installed nominal thermal capacity. No restriction applies for projects deploying heat pumps with a coefficient of performance of at least 2 or for direct renewable heat. The default restriction may be partially to fully lifted for projects that either invest in electric or thermal storage, or follow a flexible ramping schedule. Applicants can select 2 flexibility solutions, flexible ramping schedule or electricity or thermal storage. Selecting a flexible ramping schedule partially lifts the restriction to 80% of total annual hours. Selecting electricity or thermal storage fully lifts the restriction. Please note that choosing a flexibility solution at the bidding stage can affect Innovation Fund support later. If the flexibility is not implemented as required, penalties may apply. Refer to the call text for details. Finally, the template calculates the maximum grant amount based on the annual average heat, the restriction condition, and the subsidy per unit aggregated over the grant disbursement period. Below, the template also calculates the completion guarantee amount, which must cover 6% of the requested maximum grant amount. Now move to third section, which relates to the financing plan. Enter all funding sources identified for the development and construction of your project. A consistency check ensures that the values entered here match the financing values projected later in the cash flow statement. The next three sections cover the project's financial projections, the profit and loss, the cash flow statement, and the balance sheet. Always ensure that the information provided is consistent with the assumptions described in the business plan. We begin with revenues. The first part relates to industrial heat. A drop-down menu asks applicants to indicate the main sector that will use the project's industrial heat. You must then specify whether the heat will be sold to an external off-taker or consumed internally within the project's own activities. For prices and volumes, please note that values must be expressed in euros per thermal megawatt hour and in thermal megawatt hours, respectively. Ensure that the heat volumes and prices align with the heads of terms submitted in the mandatory annexes of your application. In this fictive worked example, the business model is based on heat sold to a third party. If heat is self-consumed, indicate the heat volumes reserved for self-consumption and set the prices to 0. Later in this tutorial, we will show an example where heat is self-consumed. If relevant, you may also insert volumes produced before the entry into operation date. If the project intends to sell heat to multiple off-takers, provide the detailed breakdown in a supplementary sheet, as this section only allows aggregated values for heat volumes and prices. The rows below are reserved for additional revenues that are not related to heat. Do not enter heat volumes or prices in these rows. Next, the template shows the pro rata allocation of the Innovation Fund grant by calendar year during the disbursement period. This is calculated automatically. If you expect national state aid subsidies or other EU funding during the operational period, enter this information in the following rows. After that, you may indicate any OPEX savings. We now move to OPEX. The first part relates to electricity costs. You will be asked to indicate the main electricity source and the form of procurement. Then, enter the electricity cost in euros per megawatt hour, remember to use negative values, and the electricity volumes in megawatt hours. Ensure that the electricity volumes and prices align with the heads of terms submitted in the mandatory annexes of your application. Add any applicable grid fees and levies expressed in thousands of euros. If electricity is sourced from different suppliers or generation assets, provide the detailed breakdown in a supplementary sheet, as this section only allows aggregated electricity volumes and prices. Operational costs related to other elements can be entered below. Several rows are available for other operating OPEX as well as SG&A, selling, general and administrative expenses. To complete the profit and loss statement, enter values for depreciation and amortization, net interest expenses and taxes. As a side note, if there are CAPEX-related subsidies, you may reflect this by entering reduced depreciation expenses in the row provided below depreciation and amortization. We now move to the cash flow statement. Enter information related to working capital financing and cash taxes. For construction-related CAPEX, provide the breakdown of costs across the categories listed in the template. Ensure that the CAPEX for heat equipment is consistent with the heads of terms submitted in the mandatory annexes of your application. Next, include maintenance CAPEX. These values should only be entered after the defined entry into operation date and must correspond strictly to maintenance required to sustain the plant's operational capacity. Then, proceed with the financing elements. Enter details related to your financing plan, including any CAPEX-related subsidies, equity, shareholder loans, and debt financing. Add final row allows you to enter other cash flows from financing, such as additions to a debt service reserve account. After that, provide the main parameters required for the balance sheet. Once all fields have been completed, the FIF template is fully finalized. Now, a quick word on the automatically generated output sheets. Financial Model Summary Sheet. This sheet provides a summary of the profit and loss statement, balance sheet, including a check confirming whether the model balances, and the cash flow statement. It also presents an internal rate of return, IRR, analysis of your project, both without and with the Innovation Fund grant. If you have included other subsidies, the IRR will be shown excluding and including these subsidies. The template then calculates the levelized cost of heat and levelized cost of carbon abatement, as well as the required subsidy per unit of heat for the project to reach a net present value of 0. Finally, a debt service cover ratio, DSCR, is calculated for projects planning to raise debt. The next sheets will enable you to visualize the data in various forms. Summary chart sheet. NPV analysis. Key project dates. Submitted bid parameters. Key operating metrics, shown in tables and graphs, for example, assumptions for heat prices, electricity costs and volumes over time. A summary of the funding sources and uses table, which is key to confirm that the project's development and construction are fully financed. Model report sheet. This sheet provides a condensed overview of the projections and key indicators. Model check sheet. This sheet helps you quickly identify potential errors across categories, such as project timelines, call topic selection, eligibility elements, and bid parameters, including flexible requirements. Please double-check any major errors or inconsistencies, particularly regarding eligibility, as mistakes in these areas could make your project ineligible for funding. The sheet also highlights errors in the financial projections, such as incorrect signs, or issues in the cash flow or balance sheet reconciliation. Part C support sheet. This sheet allows you to copy and paste the key data you will need to include in Part C of your application, where you provide your project's main indicators. History of changes sheet. The final sheet provides a record of all the updates made to the template for this version of the file. That concludes the walkthrough of the Financial Information File Excel file.
On the slide, we present two illustrative business model examples based on our experience with industrial heat projects that applied to previous Innovation Fund calls. Please treat these examples as illustrative only. They are not advice on how applicants should structure their business models, but rather guidance on how the FIF template can be completed for different business model types. First example, heat sold to an external off-taker. In this setup, the applicant introduces a new heat production system and sells heat to an external off-taker, who integrates it into their industrial process. Typically, the off-taker is on the same site, nearby, or connected via pipeline to a surrounding location. This setup mirrors the fifth walkthrough we presented earlier, where project revenues came from green heat sales, and OPEX included electricity, maintenance, staff and other operational costs.
The exact structure of revenues and OPEX depends on the contractual framework, such as heat purchase agreement or heat as a service agreement, using the corresponding formula to determine heat prices and costs. Second example, self-consumed heat. This example illustrates a project where the applicant integrates heat into its existing manufacturing plant in an energy-intensive sector. Specific investments may be needed to integrate the new heat supply, such as modifications to the plant or additional electricity infrastructure. In this example, the project does not generate revenues, as the end products are not sold with a premium for greener heat. OPEX savings come from reduced fossil fuel use and reduced EU ETS costs. These savings are netted against incremental costs from the project, such as higher electricity, staff, and maintenance costs. We now turn to an illustrative worked example of a project integrating heat into its existing plant, focusing on differences from the earlier FIF walkthrough. In the auction parameters section, the high-temperature heat topic is selected, assuming an industrial process heat of 800 degrees Celsius. In the profit and loss statement, heat self-consumed is selected in the drop-down menu. Heat volumes reserved for self-consumption are entered and heat prices are set to 0. No revenues are entered, consistent with the assumption made that the end products are not sold at a premium. OPEX savings are entered to reflect reductions in fossil fuel use and EU ETS costs. Incremental costs are entered for electricity and other incremental OPEX resulting from the project. No other special entries are required for the remaining sections of the template. A word on the Innovation Fund Help Desk. This tutorial has been prepared to help you complete the financial information file template. If you still have questions, please contact the Help Desk. The Help Desk link is available on the Funding and Tenders portal. When submitting a question, follow the provided instructions carefully. Read the published heat auction Q&A before contacting the Help Desk, as many details are already covered there. Be concise and clear, including only the project information necessary to answer your question. Do not ask questions about other EU programs or questions requiring opinions or judgments, as the Help Desk will not be able to provide answers to these cases. This slide provides links to Innovation Fund calls. You can also find information on upcoming calls, recorded webinars, and tutorial videos for further guidance. This concludes the Financial Information File online tutorial. Thank you for listening and for your interest in the Innovation Fund. We wish you the best of luck with your future application.